Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction with me, Beth Rigby.
Me, Ruth Davidson.
And me, Harriet Harman.
Well, it's lovely to see you both because we've had our live shows. I feel like we've been like a family on tour, like on a holiday. Although it doesn't feel like it's been a holiday, it's been quite busy. So I've missed you both. Have you missed me?
Absolutely. We were just hanging out in hotel rooms in various parts of the country. Liverpool, Manchester, Glasgow.
I know. And now we're back in Ruth somewhere down a screen again instead of by my side.
No, I'm so sorry.
On this episode, we are going to be talking about the Conservative leadership contest. I'm fresh back from Birmingham, where we had the Conservative Party conference, the four remaining candidates giving their pitches in this beauty pageant on the big stage. We're going to be talking about that. The race is still wide open. Freebie Gate, it's rumbling on. And now Lord Ali, the man behind a lot of the gifts to the Labour leader and other senior Labour figures, is being investigated. And Keir Starmer has handed back over £6,000 to cover gifts like tickets to see Taylor Swift. I think he must have been listening to you, Harriet Harman, on this podcast. So,
well, fortunately, I've got some more advice for him. So,
Harriet's advice is...
It's good. Yeah. Honestly, it's good.
It's good. I'm going to get you to give me all my advice in my life from now on. Any problem I have, I'm going to go to the Harriet Harman advice surgery.
To be fair, though, I mean, Harriet, how long were you in the House of Commons?
40 plus years.
And you were pretty well scrutinised because you were the highest ranking woman for a really long time and took a lot of incoming fire.
I would say hounded rather than scrutinised. But the two top bits of scrutiny is when I paid my road tax late. You know, you used to have a disc in the front of your car. And what happened is I was driving along and I had two paparazzi on either side of my car trying to get in front of my car with people on the back of the motorbike facing towards me to take pictures so that they could have a picture of my face with the out-of-date tax disc to show I was a tax dodger. And honestly, I nearly crashed my car on Westminster Bridge. So the level of scrutiny is absolutely beyond. But you know, you can get past it if actually it will pass the public smell test.
The public sniff test. We are going to come on to that because I want to get your advice to Keir Starmer because your advice has been spot on so far, but we're going to do it a bit later on, which is going to force all of you to carry on listening to this podcast. But before we do, I've spent most of the week in rainy Birmingham. I can't pronounce Birmingham because it has a G in the middle, and the amount of takes we had to do in my reports, because you have to say Beth Rigby, Sky News, Birmingham. I can't say it correctly and it's become a big joke. So apologies to all of you out there if you find this intensely irritating. Many of you message me to tell me you do. Apologies, but I was in Birmingham. How was that? Better?
Excellent.
That was better because, like, the first time if I was a Brummie vegan, I'd be offended at how much ham you put in Birmingham.
Anyway, I was in Birmingham, because it was the turn of the Conservatives to have their party conference. It was so weird because for me as a political editor, you go up, you have an interview with the leader, there's a kind of announcements about policies and plans, and it's kind of a moment where the party gather to showcase themselves to each other, but also to the public. But this one was, it was like the Hunger Games. It was completely weird in that Rishi Sunak dropped in on Sunday, then he left. And then it was the beauty parade of these four candidates, Kemi Badenoch, James Cleverly, Robert Jenrick and Tom Tugendhat, crescendoing, sort of culminating in this getting onto the stage and giving these 20-minute speeches in which they make their pitch for leadership. Ruth actually appeared though, Harriet. Didn't you, Ruth?
I did, remotely, which is my want, having videoed myself in my house. They did a little video ahead of their speeches and stuff. So James Cleverly had asked if I, as a supporter, would read a script for him. And I sent you one of the outtakes, Beth.
It was funny because she's standing there, like, all suited up, makeup on, going, the reason that this guy should be your leader. And then she just totally starts laughing. And then Jen then goes to the dog, who's looking like he could be the leader. It was very funny. It was daft. But James Cleverly, Blimey. I mean, talk about coming in as an underdog and coming out as top diggity dog.
I think Ruth, I've got to say to Ruth, Ruth said she backed James Cleverly, and me going, no, he's absolutely the worst one.
Have you changed your view?
Well, basically, I've really gone off Kemi Badenoch big time on account of what she said about maternity pay, amongst other things. Robert Jenrick basically saying that our special forces kill people on purpose rather than take them prisoner because they fear the European Court of Human Rights will release them afterwards, which is a terrible thing to say. So my reservations about James Cleverly are paling into insignificance.
Just if you haven't been following every twist and turn of the Conservative Party conference, where have you been? No, but seriously, what you're referring to, Harriet, is some of the clangers. I think it's fair to say that the two front runners, Rob Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch, they got the headlines this week, but for quite a bit of controversy. Kemi Badenoch did an interview with Kate McCann, my old colleague at Sky, great woman, Kate McCann, and she was asking her about maternity pay and whether Kemi Badenoch thought maternity pay was excessive. And Kemi Badenoch kind of began to talk about business regulation, but sort of seemed to agree that seemed to say to me, I listened very carefully, that it was excessive. But the point is, it created headlines in which then she had to say, I didn't say that, I don't mean that. The Conservative Party MPs are going, geez, if this woman becomes our leader, do we have to go out and defend these cock-ups? And then, as you said, Rob Jenrick said this thing about the European Convention on Human Rights and how it's stopping our armed forces from arresting terrorists or suspected terrorists or enemies, and they have to kill them instead. And the point is through the noise of the two front runners comes the James Cleverly horse galloping up the track. And honestly, he literally was physically puffed up. Like, as the conference went on, his chest got bigger and bigger. Like, he was inflating. And when he walked out to this, I'm doing an impression of him walking out and they're laughing because I'm all puffed up. He came out to do the huddle. I said, do you think you did better, James? It's like it was always the plan. I still think the race is wide open. But James Cleverly, man, Ruth, you must be delighted.
His speech was pretty good. There was bits of humour in there. It was a bit self-deprecating when he was talking about his 30-year military career, and when he finally got mobilised, it was to Luton. And it's, will he get to the final two? So his job at conference was to get himself ahead of Kemi Badenoch, who was number 2, and Jenrick's the out-and-out front runner. And I think what's interesting is we've got this supposed to be a fail-safe system so that the MPs, the parliamentary party, make a decision who the final 2 are, and then the members vote on the final 2. And that's supposed to discount people that can't command the support of the House. Now, the MPs have been caught out before because they've been told, or they thought, the party will never forgive us if we don't put X through into the final.
Yes.
And they did that with Truss, and they got burned big time. And that same question is over Kemi Badenoch. Will the members forgive us if we don't put Kemi on the ballot? And there were concerns anyway about how pugilistic she is. She's a very confrontational politician, and she even put it in her own speech. It's not that I like a fight, it's just I'm not afraid of one. And part of the job of being in opposition is that you've got to romance the people that don't vote for you anymore. You've got to woo them. You've got to listen to them. You've got to see what their concerns are. She does not do that. The idea that she's going to sit down and do 1 million round tables with business groups and charities and interest groups and all that sort of stuff is for the birds. But the gaffes will have really given the MPs pause. Everybody makes mistakes all the time. What's quite instructive is how a politician deals with a mistake or a gaffe. And she has consistently doubled down on it and attacked the people that are calling her on it.
And interestingly, James Cleverly was asked about the Rohypnol joke, the joke he made, that you were really upset about, Harry, and lots of people were upset about. And he basically in this Q&A said, I messed up. I was trying to make a point. It was really cat-handed. Mrs. Cleverly was really angry with me. I'm sorry. It was a mistake, and I was frustrated with myself because it actually detracted on what the work we were trying to do. It still doesn't make it okay that he said it, but at least he owned the mistake. I mean, Ruth, on Cleverly though, in the speech he did make digs at the opponents. He said, I don't pretend to be a war hero, I think was a dig at Tom Tugendhat. I don't complain about immigration or walk away from the challenge. There you go. There's a dig at Rob Jenrick. And on Kemi, choose someone who doesn't hide from the media. So he got his punches in, didn't he?
Well, I think there weren't overt attacks. It wasn't saying. I thought the one about not being a war hero was actually more self-deprecating, because he is quite self-deprecating. But he was making the point that, I have advantages over the rest of the field in this area and this area and this area. And I think that's legitimate.
So I'm going to ask you, who do you now think will be in the final two, Ruth?
I think it's going to be really close. I think the next person that falls away is going to be Tom Tugendhat. And I think James might sneak in. I think it'll be James and Robert Jenrick.
Interestingly, the betting markets, Cleverly is now the second favourite, so he's overtaken Kemi, who's dropped third.
I can't understand why Jenrick is regarded in his party as a right-wing candidate, although he's obviously been trying to put that forward when he was a Remainer. But the other thing, and I know people might think this is a trivial point, but I think it's quite an important point about James Cleverly, is that why does he have to be having his wife in tow the whole time when he goes around conference? I mean, Ruth, if you were going around Tory party conference, and it was an absolute delight and pleasure for me to meet your wife Jen on the road, and if anybody was going to tow around their wife, I would say tow Jen around.
Jen.
But you don't, because it's work and you're out there and you are the person that's doing it, and you don't bring your husband, do you, when you're working?
God, no.
And lean on him. So why...
He's too busy looking after our children.
Lucky somebody is, that's great.
Yeah, thank the Lord. Thank the Lord. Thank you, St. Ange.
I just think that they should be recognising that this is work, they're doing a job, and we shouldn't get into this heteronormalism. Sorry.
Heteronormalism.
What do we want? Not heteronormalism. When do we want it? Now.
The question, though, as well, Harriet, is who do you think will be in the final two? It's an impossible question to answer, really.
Well, I think Ruth is probably right. Jenrick and Cleverly.
We did some polling this week, which said in that case scenario, Jenrick's very slightly ahead with members, but by 4 points.
But it's kinetic, isn't it? It's all moving.
I do think there is a world in which Kemi, I can see a world in which the MPs think we need to keep her off the ballot, because I think if she gets to the final two, she could well win it.
We're going to be saying that Kemi is to social policy what Liz Truss was to the economy.
You loved it. I saw that tweet. So you would like her to win. You think she would be good for Labour?
Yeah, it's good for Labour to have a hopeless opposition that can't look like an alternative government. But it's actually not good for democracy to not have a proper opposition holding the government to account. And actually, government does better when there is a tough opposition. It's probably better for the government to have a good opposition. So
who would be your choice then?
James Cleverly out with Ruth now.
Wow.
Okay.
Blimey.
I know.
Electoral dysfunctions. Do you remember? Do you remember the Harriet Harman hostility to James Cleverly? I mean, he really is something else, isn't he, this guy?
It's just the others have gone down, not that he's gone up.
Oh,
the others have gone down even further.
Well, if you will indulge me, I have done this a bit this week, so I had so much fun with it. There was a very senior Conservative who will remain nameless, but who says to me it's a bit like the Hunger Games, and this sort of sparked my imagination, because when you go into the hall, they've got these giant banners, like different houses of the leaders. I was like, oh, yeah. And then it reminded me that another Conservative had said to me the night before that this was a time where they're going to get the sorting hat out and sort through the candidates. So then I said to this person, what Hogwarts houses would you put them all in? And I had quite a lot of fun with this. Now, Harriet, do you know about Hogwarts houses? Because if you don't, I'm going to go straight to Ruth.
I think you better go straight to
Ruth.
Ruth.
I'm going straight to Ruth. Ruth.
Yeah.
I have a list of how this person sorted them into different houses. Can you tell me how you'd sort them, and then I'll tell you how they sorted them?
So I think probably Hufflepuff would be Tom Tugendhat. I think he's quite, of the four, and this is all relative, he's sort of probably more of the cuddly, softer side. Gryffindor, in terms of courage and not being daunted, I would say James. Like he's taken on some pretty big jobs, and he's done them to the best of his ability, and he's had pretty good write-ups from the people he's worked with.
Right.
So what's the other? Ambition and cunning and big brain.
Slytherin, ambition. And then Ravenclaw is big brain.
Do you know, I don't actually know who's smarter out of Jenrick and Kemi.
Do you want to put them both in Slytherin? You can have them both in there. To be fair, we with Slytherin we did it as ambition.
I guess Jenrick, because he has wanted this since before it was obvious that the Prime Minister was going to be leaving his post.
Is it true what I read about Jenrick, that his daughter's middle name is Thatcher?
Yes.
Because he loved her so much.
Yes.
I think that's quite weird.
Do you
Is there
find
a
that
house
weird?
for weird people?
I think that's mental. I think it's weird. I also think that if you've got a daughter and you want to pay tribute to a former leader of the Conservative Party, call her middle name Margaret. Like, don't call her Thatcher, call her Margaret. It's right there as a woman's name.
I'm just going to give you the House description by this very senior Conservative. Rob Jenrick, Slytherin equals ambition. Kemi Badenoch, Gryffindor, courage. James Cleverly, Hufflepuff, don't discount being nice. And then we put Tom Tugendhat into Ravenclaw because we all had a bit too much to drink and couldn't actually remember what it was, although I looked it up the next day. So that was the definitions. I quite like that.
You haven't told me who this was, but I'm pretty sure it was somebody that had previously told us that the next leader of the Conservative Party would be a woman. Does he still think that's the case? Does he still think that Kemi's the front runner?
So after we'd done the housing sorting hat, I knew that this person was there watching the speeches, and I messaged them and I went, Hufflepuff, hey, who knew? I said, Hufflepuff's done a bit better than I thought they might have done. And then they said, he did very well. So I think that person might be, maybe don't underestimate a Hufflepuff.
But one of the things that I didn't notice coming out of the Tory conference, Ruth, is the recognition that there needs to be real soul-searching and real massive change in order to get back with the public because of how thoroughly beaten they were. The other thing that I didn't hear is people being asked the question, do you think Nigel Farage should be in the Tory party? That's what I'd like to hear each of the candidates answer that question.
I can tell you what, and then we need to move on, but when James Cleverly in the hall said that the reform was a poor version of the great party, Conservative Party, that Nigel Farage was not going to go into the party and they were not going to merge with Reform, it got the biggest cheer in the hall. It was very interesting. Like, they absolutely lapped that up. The other thing that happened at conference that I wanted to bring in, because again, for me, as political editor, it was really discombobulating that as we're about to, on Tuesday evening, we're looking at the kind of next day and the leader pitches and how we're going to package that for television and report that. The ballistic missile strikes begin from Iran into Israel, and it happened sort of late afternoon. We're all sitting in the newsroom, and then we look at the television screens and you've just got these visions of these missiles raining down. And actually at conference, it was very odd because we're kind of in this Conservative Party bubble talking about who's up, who's down, and then suddenly it just seems so irrelevant because you're now looking at the escalation of the tensions in the Middle East, and we switched our screens to kind of the live rolling coverage, and delegates were gathering around, and then the Prime Minister, we hear, is going to give a statement in Downing Street, and I was in this uncomfortable position really as being a political editor. You're like, I need to be outside Downing Street now. I'm in Birmingham, but I actually need to be outside Downing Street reporting on the UK response to the Middle East crisis. And it was it wasn't very comfortable, kind of these parallel worlds where suddenly we're talking amongst ourselves about domestic politics and there's this much bigger crisis unfolding. I'm sorry to say, I think that this is now going to be something that's dominating the news cycles and the minds of our politicians in the coming weeks and months. Okay, we're back. And away from Birmingham and the Tory conference, the row over donations, the PM and other senior Labour figures is still rumbling on. This week we had the news that Lord Ali, the man who's given the most money to Keir Starmer since he's been Labour leader, is now being investigated himself over a potential breach of the Code of Conduct. Harriet, can you shed any light on what this is all about?
I think that it's basically that he's failed to register that he was involved in a particular charity. So I think it's what might amount to a technical breach.
Right.
He's not actually probably receiving any money, but you do have to register if you're chair of a charity, just for full disclosure. But the other issue of the questions of the clothes and the travel and things, some people are saying, why are you even talking about this? You've got the Middle East going up in flames. You've got the cost of living crisis being a problem. You've got the NHS. Why are you even talking about this? You're just siding with the Tories to undermine this new government. And I think it's worth remembering why this is something that has to be talked about. Firstly, I think because people are feeling the pinch, and therefore they are likely to feel resentful if they think that the politicians don't understand how they feel because they are getting those things for free. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is that people want to think that the government is motivated by the public interest and that the influential people are the voters, not influenced by people who've got enough money to give big donations. And it's worth looking at the Nolan principles. There's the 7 Nolan principles on public life. And one of them quite specifically says that you must actually not gain financially or other benefits on behalf of yourself or your family. And that's what you actually sign up to when you actually go into the House of Commons. So those principles are there and they need to be respected. And the other thing is that people have been burnt by and felt really aggrieved by what was done in the last Tory government with Boris Johnson and his wallpaper and his holidays to Mystique. And actually, people want to feel there's a change. They don't want to feel, oh, they're all the same. So there's that layer of disappointment. So that's why we're talking about it.
There's a lot in that, Harriet. Let me just unpack a little bit of it, because what's happened this week is that Keir Starmer announced that he is going to pay back, or has paid back, £6,000 in gifts and donations, including the cost of 6 tickets to see Taylor Swift. He's paid back some of the money for going to the races. He's paid back some of the money around Vic Starmer's clothing. Harriet, that is what you were recommending a week ago. So even though Starmer hasn't verbally said in an interview, this was a mistake, I shouldn't have done it, the fact he's paying some of the money back, there's an acknowledgement there about how this looks. He also said, when asked about this in quite a cursory way, that we're going to come back with a set of principles, which is interesting, Harriet, when you're talking about the Nolan principles, because when you look at those, it makes it quite clear about the moral decisions you take about this or that.
Also, we need to have some new rules and new processes. They're going some way towards that, but actually they haven't quite got there yet. And they need to appoint their new ethics commissioner to bring this all together. And I think they ought to have something like a COBRA, where you get everybody in the same room, everybody who's involved, the senior civil servants in the cabinet office, the cabinet members who are involved, and you all decide. It's a bit like when the global financial crisis hit, we were like, we're not going to wait for the next bank to collapse or the next one. We're going to jump over and in front of it and actually stabilise the situation. And I think that what they need to do is jump over and above this, stabilise it and sort it out, rather than respond to each story day by day by day.
So I kind of half agree with Harriet in that I think the idea that he's paid back over £6,000 worth of stuff he's taken since he was in government, I actually think that opens up a few more questions than it answers. A question around the discrepancy of what he's paying back and why. And this continues this what we call a dripping roast, which is there's a little story every day. What I do agree with Harriet with is you have to get out in front of it. And anyone that's ever done any crisis comms or defensive sort of action to try and clear something up when they're under pressure, the absolute golden rule is you get out in front of a story, you get everything out of the way, and you kill it dead. But in terms of how you get out in front of it, you have to say something is going to change or put something in train to review it, and then you can answer every single time. So the stuff that he's saying now about changing the rules on donations, great. Should have said that 2.5, 3 weeks ago. That would have killed it. We're going to bring forward ideas on how to change the rules of donations. And then anytime they're asked, they can say, yes, but we're doing this work to bring forward a change into how we do donations.
I mean, this is not rocket science, because I was basically saying we need to have a cap on donations. People do feel a bit squeamish about large amounts of money going in donations. We need to have a cap on individual donations, and we need to have a cap on how much money each party can receive. You see, there's a sense that there's an individual decision from the Prime Minister about what he pays back. But actually, he's the leader of the government, and he needs to make the decision about what other cabinet ministers pay back, not leave it as a personal matter.
When I saw that he'd paid this back and I put it out, I immediately thought of you, Harriet, and the advice you had given at the beginning of this when we were discussing it. And you had said it's not a hanging offence. He should just say that he is now paying back or donating the money to charity, that it was now as Prime Minister, he's not going to do this stuff again. And that was your advice early on. And as Ruth was saying, maybe if he'd taken that advice, he could have killed it. He didn't. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. He's now paying the money back. So he's kind of catching up with where sort of wise brains like Harriet were a little while ago politically. But then, I tweet it out, and then this is John Penrose, a former Conservative MP. He's retweeted me and he's saying this won't solve the government's integrity problems for several reasons. He's given, this is a long thread. I'm not going to repeat all of it, but he's basically saying it's not leadership. Starmer isn't requiring other ministers to follow his example. It doesn't solve possible conflicts of interest. If it means ministers owe the donor a favour, it doesn't matter if it happens 6 weeks before the election or 6 weeks after. So the point I'm trying to make is he's done something to try and kind of shut it down, and then immediately it kind of keeps the dripping roast, keeps going.
The reason why he needs to is not just for the reasons I said before, but because he's got a massive job to do. Yesterday he was in Brussels talking with his European allies about the security implications of the, small boats and how you work together to stop that, about trade needed, about building better relations with Europe. And yet he was asked in his press conference about this. So basically, he does need to just get ahead. And there's about 5 or 6 things that he can do, because I don't think that any of them, and I know these people, they're not money motivated. They're not greedy people who want to live the high life. They're not disrespectful of the feelings of people in the public who are feeling the pinch. So really, it should be quite straightforward to sort it, and they should just sort it.
Do you think, just going back though, Harriet, as well, you said there should be a cap on donations. What do you mean by that?
I think that the amount any individual donor can give in 1 year should be capped. And I think that the amount that each party can receive in a year and in the run-up to election should be capped.
Because part of the problem is the Lord Ali, Number 10, didn't know whether he's donating to Starmer and Angie Rayner. He donated some money to Sue Gray's son when he was doing his campaign. So part of the problem is you have an individual donor with individual relationships with people who's individually contributing. Wouldn't it be better if you just say any donations has to come directly into central office, and then central office sends the money out?
I think that you can't necessarily ban it altogether, but you need to put a ceiling on it.
So a Lord Ali cap, like you can, if you want to donate, this is the limit with which you will do that.
So basically, each individual donor should have a limit on how much they put, and that should go for the unions as well. People, they just don't like the big money's involvement with politics. And I say that as somebody who strongly defends the relationship between the trade unions and the party, and also, admires Lord Ali's loyalty to the party. He's been a long-standing member of the party and loyal to the party through good times and through bad. But I just think the system needs to change. And I think it could be changed quite quickly, because this is not rocket science and it's all been gone through by the Standards Committee. The blueprint is there.
Do you agree, Ruth?
Do you know, I was listening to Harriet there when she was talking about the fact that the people that are at the centre of this row that took tens of thousands of pounds worth of free stuff, that they're not money motivated, they're not, high rollers, they're not immoral people or anything like that. I was just thinking, what sort of response would a Conservative that said that about other Conservatives get? They'd be laughed out the room. And I wonder about that double standard.
I think there is a wider discussion about money in politics and cap limits, but he can still get ahead of this story by taking a lead on it, and he needs to lead his cabinet colleagues as well and have some clear rules about what they should be paying back, because otherwise people are just going to go to the other members of the cabinet and say, you took this, are you going to pay it back? And then each time they pay it back, there'll be another story, X has paid some money back.
Agree, 100% agree.
Also, I realised that we started off with Lord Ali and then we went somewhere else about the investigation. The thing about these investigations is you get investigated and it can just be stuff like you haven't notified in time, or it could be a technical breach.
I mean, sometimes you do just make a complaint that has to be investigated so that you can say publicly somebody is being investigated for a complaint. And it's the insinuation that something has gone wrong is enough to add fuel to the fire, and it's enough to be reported, and it's enough to drag it into another day. I think I saw a quote from Lord Ali's camper from the Labour Party that said, look, just because there's an investigation doesn't actually mean something has necessarily gone wrong. They are technically kind of right about that. And sometimes in politics, when you're having the knockabout, sometimes you do just want a public investigation that has to be public so that you can say somebody is under investigation, because the implication is that a wrongdoing has occurred.
Well, look, a Labour spokesman said Lord Ali will cooperate fully with the Lords Commissioner and he's confident all interests have been registered. We cannot comment further while it's ongoing. But I agree with you, Ruth. You know, even if it is a technical breach, it's unhelpful, to say the least, for Keir Starmer that there's now an investigation into Lord Ali, because it just keeps it in the headlines. But look, let's move on, because I want to mention something that you're going to like this, you two. Now, during our live show in Liverpool, Julie, who was in the audience, do you remember Julie, asked us who was the best smelling politician. And basically Harriet admitted that she never breathes when politicians talk to her because they've all got terrible breath. So we all just scratched our head and then pivoted to hairstyles because we couldn't answer this question. But I now have the answer.
Go on then.
I have the answer, Julie. When I was at a party conference, there was a Tory grandee who said to me, Beth, I want to do an interview with you about why I am backing Rob Jenrick. And I said, all right, I'll meet you in the lobby of the Hyatt Hotel at 4 p.m. and we'll put this on camera. And he walked up and it was like, oh, I just smelled great. I was like, I found him. I was sniffing him. It was Nadeem Zahawi. He smelled bloody great.
What was it?
Did you ask him?
Yeah, of course I did. It was Seduce by Chloe.
I mean, that sounds filthy.
It smelled good.
I'm still holding my breath.
Robert Jenrick seduced him, that's for sure. He's backing Rob. Oh, the other thing I didn't mention, actually, on this slightly now sexy conversation, or not.
No.
So at party conference, I go to this Jenrick rally on a Monday. It's Monday morning, it's 8:30. I'm in a big room. The lights are low. Everyone's got Bobby J caps on. Bobby J caps, right? I did not wear a Bobby J cap. Obviously, I have to remain scrupulously neutral. None of the merch that was offered to me was worn or displayed by Beth Rigby Sky News. But it then emerges that Bobby J has an entirely different meaning, which some of you kids out there might know, but I, as an old...
Ruth knows that meaning.
I didn't know that
She's so
meaning.
street.
Well, can I just say, it's not just that the caps said Bobby J. The caps said, we want Bobby J.
We want Bobby J.
So if you know what a Bobby J is, or sometimes... You know, if you wanted to shorten it further to say BJ, and
that would lead you to the conclusion.
Yeah, exactly. You know, there were people there that didn't know what they were wearing that were walking around. People perhaps of a more conservative disposition that perhaps might not be suggesting that necessarily was what they were open for business for that evening.
Blimey. I tell you what, Conservative Party conference, I was scandalised when I found this out. I was like, that's disgusting. Anyway.
But one of the things that hasn't happened at any of these party conferences, which has regularly happened before, is where there's a fire alarm in a hotel at party conference and everybody has to rush down onto the street and line up. And in the middle of the night, you see people scantily clad standing on the pavements. And you think, why is that person in that hotel? That's not actually their hotel.
Oh, blimey.
Yeah, and then everybody adds two and two together.
Honestly, the things that go on at conference, I can tell you, I am just so innocent.
Do you know, I've never understood the kind of conference bed hopping, because party conferences are probably the least sexy events you can go to.
Not if you're wearing your Bobby J cap, it's not.
Oh, you haven't been to Labour Party conference, Ruth.
Anyway, that is it for today. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, if you have something you want to ask us, send us a voice note to my burner phone on 07934 200 444 or email us at electraldysfunction@sky.uk. And also, can I just give a shout out to John? John sent me a picture of him listening to the podcast on top of Mount Kilimanjaro. That is definitely the biggest high I've ever got, I'm telling you now.
See what you did there?
Did you like that? Yeah. I just did that off the top of my head as well. That's because I'm quite funny sometimes, as I say so myself. He said, Beth Rigby's voice hits different at the top of Kilimanjaro. John, I sent Ruth and Harriet your picture, and Ruth's decided that what we should do is get you guys to sort of send us photos of where you're listening to the podcast. Was that your idea, Ruth?
Yeah, completely. And it doesn't have to be, at the top of Africa's highest peak. But, like, if you're listening somewhere interesting, like in your allotment, or I was going to say in your bath, don't send us pictures of you in the bath.
Or we'll take a bath picture with strategic bubbles. That's fine.
But please don't have a We Want a Bobby J cap on at the time, will you?
Someone send us a We Want Bobby J listening to the podcast. That is incoming, I'm sure. Thank you for listening, and we will be back next week. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.